Trust me, you won't forget this one. She sat in that gold chair like a queen on a throne, snapping her fingers at a woman old enough to be her mother. Clean it properly, she hissed, pointing at her white heel. The whole ballroom went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The maid knelt down, tears falling onto the marble floor, and did as she was told. But what nobody in that room knew, not the guests, not the billionaire standing frozen on the staircase, not even the woman giving the order, was that this one moment was about to destroy an empire, expose a secret buried for 15 years, and change 3 lives forever. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and which country do you call home? Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. A story about pride, betrayal, and the kind of quiet strength that money can never buy. Stay with me until the very end, because the ending of this story is not what you think it is. Nobody in that ballroom expected the night to end this way. The Hale estate had never looked more beautiful. Crystal chandeliers threw soft gold light across the marble floor. Waiters in black moved silently between 300 guests, carrying trays of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Somewhere near the grand staircase, a string quartet played something soft and elegant, the kind of music that belonged in old movies. This was the engagement party of the decade. Daniel Hale, 34 years old, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country, was about to announce his marriage to Vanessa Cole, a woman as beautiful as she was ambitious. Daniel stood near the staircase in a tailored yellow suit, watching the crowd with the tired, distant look of a man who had built an empire but never quite learned how to enjoy it. He had spent 15 years climbing out of nothing, a small apartment above a laundromat, a mother who worked 2 jobs, a father who left before Daniel could even remember his face. Every dollar he had now, he had earned with his own hands. And yet, standing in the middle of his own success, he looked strangely empty. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like she belonged there. She always did. In her deep purple gown, diamonds catching the chandelier light, she moved through the room like she owned it, because in a way, she believed she soon would. Near the edge of the room, almost invisible in her red and white uniform, a woman named Maria Torres refilled water glasses and cleared empty plates. She was 34, the same age as Daniel, though nobody at that party would have guessed it. Years of exhaustion had aged her face in ways money never ages a person. She worked quietly, efficiently, the way she always did. The way you learn to work when you have a sick child at home and a mountain of medical bills with your name on them. Maria had taken this job 3 months ago, desperate and out of options. The pay was decent, the hours brutal, but it was enough to keep her son Ethan's medical treatments going. She never looked directly at the guests. She never spoke unless spoken to. She had learned, the hard way, that invisibility was safer. But tonight, invisibility wasn't going to save her. It happened just after the toast. Vanessa had taken her seat in a large gold armchair near the staircase, laughing loudly at something one of her friends said, her white heels catching bits of mud from the garden outside. She glanced down, frowned, and without even looking up, snapped her fingers toward the nearest staff member. That staff member happened to be Maria. "You. Come here." Maria walked over, head slightly bowed, the way she'd been trained to. "Yes, Vanessa extended her leg, heel pointed forward like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. "My shoes are dirty. Clean them." Maria blinked. "I'll get a cloth right away, or I can call." "I didn't ask you to call anyone." Vanessa's voice sharpened, loud enough now that heads nearby began to turn. "I asked you to clean them. Now." The room, which had been full of laughter and music seconds ago, began to quiet in that slow, uncomfortable way rooms do when something is about to go wrong. Guests turned. Waiters froze mid-step. Even the quartet's music seemed to fade into the background. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she knelt down, pulling a small cloth from her apron pocket. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back, but she thought of Ethan, of the hospital bills, of the job she could not afford to lose. So she knelt, and she wiped the mud from Vanessa's white heels, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. "Properly," Vanessa said coldly, loud enough for the whole room to hear now. "Like you mean it." Somewhere near the staircase, Daniel had gone still. He hadn't seen the beginning of the exchange, but he saw this, his fiancée, sitting like royalty, ordering a grown woman to her knees in front of 300 guests. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he couldn't quite name yet. He started moving through the crowd toward them, but before he could reach her, something happened that none of them expected. Maria looked up. Not at Vanessa. At Daniel. And for one full second, something passed across Daniel's face. Recognition, confusion, disbelief. Like he was looking at a ghost from a life he thought he'd buried a long time ago. "Maria," he said quietly, almost to himself. The room, already silent, seemed to hold its breath even harder. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute. Vanessa's head snapped toward Daniel, her eyebrows drawing together. "You know her?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He was staring at Maria like the 15 years between them had folded into nothing. She had cut her hair since he last saw her. There were lines near her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was her, the same steady gaze, the same quiet strength she'd always carried, even now, kneeling on a marble floor in front of people who saw her as nothing more than hired help. "Daniel Hale." Maria stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know this was your house." "You two know each other?" Vanessa repeated, sharper this time, standing up from her chair. To understand what was happening in that room, you need to understand who Maria Torres used to be. Long before she was on her knees cleaning shoes at a party she was never meant to attend as anything but staff. 15 years ago, Daniel Hale was not a billionaire. He was a broke 20-year-old working night shifts at a small auto repair shop to pay for community college classes he could barely afford. His mother, Elaine, had raised him alone after his father walked out, working double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. Daniel had one dream back then, to build something of his own, something nobody could ever take away from him. Maria had grown up 2 streets over. Her father, Manuel, ran a small hardware store that had been in the family for 2 generations. She was smart, sharp, the kind of person who read library books faster than the library could restock them. She and Daniel had known each other since they were teenagers, drifting in and out of each other's lives through shared friends and a neighborhood too small to keep people apart for long. They fell in love the way young people do when they have nothing but time and dreams, slowly, then all at once. Daniel used to say Maria was the only person who believed he'd actually make it big, back when everyone else, including his own mother, quietly worried he was chasing something impossible. But life doesn't always follow the plans young lovers make. When Daniel was 22, his mother collapsed at work. It was a heart condition nobody had caught in time. The hospital bills piled up faster than he could work them off. He took a second job, then a third, sleeping 4 hours a night, trying to build his first small business idea, a modest repair and resale shop for old electronics, while keeping his mother alive. Maria was there through all of it. She would bring him food after her father's store closed. She helped him fix his mother's oxygen machine when it broke at 2 in the morning. She believed in him when believing in him cost her almost everything, including, eventually, her own father's approval. Manuel didn't want his daughter tied to a boy with nothing but debt and a dream. He pushed her to focus on her nursing studies, to build a stable future, to let go of a relationship he saw as a beautiful risk headed nowhere good. Then, one night, everything fell apart. Daniel's business idea failed. Badly. He lost the small amount of savings he had, and with it, what little confidence he had left. He pulled away from everyone, ashamed, convinced he was destined to be exactly what people expected, nothing. Maria tried to reach him, again and again, but grief and shame have a way of building walls even love cannot climb. By the time Daniel resurfaced from that dark period, ready to fight again, ready to build the empire that would one day become Hale Enterprises, Maria was gone. Her family had moved across the state for her father's declining health. Phone numbers changed. Letters went unanswered. In the chaos of building a new life from nothing, Daniel told himself it was better this way, that Maria deserved a life without his failures attached to it. He never stopped thinking about her. He simply stopped looking. Now, 15 years later, standing in the middle of his own engagement party, he was looking directly at the one person who had believed in him before he had a single reason to believe in himself, and she was standing there in a maid's uniform, having just been humiliated by the woman he was about to marry. "Daniel," Vanessa said again, her voice like ice cutting through the silence. "I asked you a question. How do you know this woman?" Daniel finally tore his eyes away from Maria and looked at his fiancée, and for the first time that night, something in his expression had changed completely. "She's not just this woman," he said quietly. "She's someone who mattered to me before I had anything worth mattering for." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face flickered, just for a second, with something colder than embarrassment. And somewhere near the back of the room, an older woman gasped and pressed a hand to her mouth, staring at Maria like she had just seen a ghost. "Manuel Torres's daughter," the woman whispered. "Oh my God. It's really her." Nobody in that room yet understood why that name mattered so much. But they were about to find out. The older woman who had gasped was Rosalind Hale, Daniel's aunt, his late mother's younger sister, one of the few family members who had known him back when he had nothing. She pushed through the crowd, her eyes wet, and took both of Maria's hands in hers. "You saved her life," Rosalind said, her voice trembling. "You saved Elaine's life. Do you understand what this girl did for your mother, Daniel?" Daniel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Rosalind turned to the crowd, then back to her nephew, as though she couldn't believe he didn't already know. "The night your mother collapsed the second time, the really bad one, when the ambulance was 20 minutes out because of the storm, this girl was the one who kept her breathing. She was 17 years old, barely trained, and she performed CPR on the kitchen floor for 18 minutes until the paramedics arrived. The doctors said if she hadn't known what to do, your mother would not have survived long enough to make it to the hospital." The room had gone completely silent again, but this silence was different. This wasn't the tense, uncomfortable silence of watching someone be humiliated. This was the silence of people realizing they were witnessing something enormous unfold in real time. Daniel felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. "I didn't. I never knew that. Your mother made me promise not to. She said you already carried enough weight without knowing how close you came to losing her that night." Daniel stared at her, a decade and a half of unanswered questions crashing into him at once. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years, and you never once thought to reach out. "I tried," Maria said, and now her voice cracked slightly. "I called. I wrote. My father moved us 3 states away for his own health. Daniel. Every number I had for you stopped working within a year. By the time I built a stable enough life to come looking, you were already," she gestured faintly at the mansion around them, "this. A different world. I told myself you'd moved on. That maybe it was better." "Better?" Daniel's voice rose slightly, disbelief cutting through years of practiced composure. "Maria, I built half of this company thinking about the version of my life where you were still in it." The crowd had gone eerily still, 300 of the city's wealthiest guests watching a private, 15-year-old wound tear open in front of them. Vanessa stood frozen near her chair, her jaw tight, watching the man she was about to marry unravel in front of everyone. Not because of scandal, not because of money, but because of a truth far more dangerous to her plans: real, unfinished love. "This is absurd," Vanessa finally said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. "Daniel, she's the help. Whatever sad story this is, it doesn't belong at our engagement party." It was the wrong thing to say, and everyone in that room knew it the second it left her mouth. Daniel turned to her slowly. "She just saved my mother's life 15 years ago, and 30 minutes ago you had her on her knees cleaning your shoes in front of every person I know." His voice was quiet now, but it carried across the entire ballroom. "What does that tell you about the kind of person you are, Vanessa?" Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time all night. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I didn't know who she was. Nobody told me she was some nurse from your past. You didn't need to know who she was, Daniel said. You saw a woman on her knees, working hard to survive, and you decided that made her less than human. That's not about who Maria is. That's about who you are. Rosalind, still holding Maria's hands, spoke again, her voice gentler now but no less firm. There's something else, Daniel. Something Maria doesn't know that I think you both need to hear. The room leaned in, collectively, without meaning to. When your mother passed 3 years ago, Rosalind continued, she left specific instructions in her will. A trust, set aside for a young woman named Maria Torres, in case she ever needed help, medical, financial, anything. Elaine never forgot what you did for her, sweetheart. She made me promise that if you ever came back into our lives, I would make sure you knew. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. I didn't. I never knew about any of that. I would never have come here asking for. She's not asking for anything, Daniel cut in gently, stepping closer to her. She never was. That's exactly the problem, Vanessa. Maria has spent her entire life giving without expecting anything back. And you spent tonight taking from someone who had nothing left to give. The party, if you could still call it that, had completely fallen apart. Guests clustered in small groups, whispering, phones lowered but recording, some quietly slipping toward the exits, sensing that whatever was happening here was far bigger than gossip. It was the unraveling of an engagement in real time, live, in front of 300 witnesses. Vanessa grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him a few steps away from the crowd, her voice dropping into a hiss only he could hear. Do you understand what you're doing right now? Our families merged 2 companies for this wedding. The board is expecting an announcement tonight. You cannot let some sentimental reunion with the housekeeper destroy everything we've built. We haven't built anything, Vanessa, Daniel said quietly. You built a merger. I built a company. Somewhere in between, I convinced myself that was the same thing as building a life. You're being emotional, she snapped. This is exactly why I never. She stopped herself, but not fast enough. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Never what? Vanessa's jaw tightened. For the first time that night, she looked less like a queen and more like someone caught in a lie. Nothing. Forget it. But Daniel had spent 15 years reading people in boardrooms for a living, and he knew a dodge when he heard one. Finish the sentence, Vanessa. Across the room, unnoticed in the chaos, Daniel's head of security, a quiet man named Frank who had worked for the family for over a decade, approached Rosalind with a tablet in his hand. He'd been reviewing footage from the estate's cameras earlier that week for an unrelated security matter and had noticed something that, until this moment, he hadn't known how to bring up. Frank said quietly to Rosalind. I think Mr. Hale needs to see this. Now, before this goes any further. Rosalind glanced at the tablet, her expression hardening, and without hesitation, walked it directly over to Daniel. You need to see this, she said, cutting through his tense exchange with Vanessa. On the screen was security footage from the estate's private guest wing, time-stamped 4 days earlier. Vanessa, in the footage, was standing close to a man Daniel recognized instantly. Preston Cole, Vanessa's older cousin and, more importantly, the CFO of Colworth Holdings, the company Vanessa's family had been negotiating a merger with for the past 8 months. The same merger the wedding was meant to seal. In the footage, Vanessa laughed, leaned in, and kissed Preston. Not the quick, friendly kiss of family, but something far more intimate, far more damning. Daniel stared at the screen in silence for a long moment before looking up at Vanessa, whose face had gone pale as the color drained out of her carefully composed expression. Care to finish that sentence now? He asked quietly. That's not, Daniel, that's not what it looks like. It looks exactly like what it is, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the storm clearly building behind his eyes. You've been seeing Preston. While planning our wedding. while your family used our engagement to leverage a merger with his company." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, bitter and disbelieving. "I spent tonight being humiliated for caring about someone who once saved my mother's life, by a woman who was betraying me the entire time she was planning to marry me for a business deal." Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Daniel. My family needs this merger. Preston and I, it's complicated, it's not." "I don't need you to explain it," Daniel said quietly. "I need you to leave." Gasps rippled through the crowd still watching, phones no longer even trying to hide themselves. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time all night, seemed to realize there was no version of this story where she came out looking like anything other than exactly what she was. She turned, grabbed her purse from a nearby table, and walked toward the front doors, her white heels, the very ones Maria had knelt to clean less than an hour earlier, clicking sharply against the marble in a room gone completely, utterly silent. Daniel didn't watch her leave. He was already turning back toward Maria, who stood frozen near the staircase, still in her uniform, tears still drying on her cheeks, looking like she couldn't quite believe any of what she had just witnessed. "I'm sorry," he said softly, closing the distance between them. "For all of it. For 15 years of silence. For not being there when your father moved your family. For letting tonight happen to you at all before I even knew you were standing 3 feet away from me." Maria shook her head slowly. "You don't owe me an apology for tonight, Daniel. You didn't do that. She did." "Maybe not," Daniel said. "But I own this house. I own this party. And I let a woman who saved my mother's life kneel on my floor before I recognized her." His voice thickened slightly. "That's on me too." The days that followed were nothing like anything Maria had ever experienced. News of the broken engagement spread fast, first through whispers among the city's elite, then, inevitably, through phones and screens far beyond the ballroom where it happened. A grainy video of Vanessa snapping her fingers at a kneeling maid, followed by Daniel's quiet, furious defense of her, had been uploaded within hours. By the next morning, it had over 2 million views. Maria hated it. She hated seeing her worst moment played on repeat, hated the comments, hated strangers debating her life like she was a character in a story instead of a real person trying to keep her son alive. She almost quit the job entirely, embarrassed and overwhelmed, until Daniel showed up at her apartment 2 days later. Not as her employer, not as a billionaire, but as the boy she used to bring dinner to on the nights his mother worked too late to cook. He stood awkwardly in the hallway of her small apartment building, holding a bag of groceries like he wasn't quite sure what else to bring. "I know this is strange," he said. "I know I have no right to just show up. But I couldn't stop thinking about you since that night, and I needed to see how you were doing. How Ethan is doing." Maria hesitated at the door, arms crossed, equal parts wary and exhausted. "You don't need to feel guilty, Daniel. This isn't your responsibility." "I'm not here out of guilt," he said quietly. "I'm here because for 15 years, some part of me never stopped wondering what happened to you. And I finally have the chance to find out, and I don't want to waste it." She let him in. Inside, the apartment was small but warm, a couch that had clearly been repaired more than once, second-hand furniture arranged with care, and in the corner, a hospital-grade oxygen concentrator hooked up beside a narrow bed where an 8-year-old boy lay watching cartoons, thin and pale but smiling the second he saw his mother. "Mommy, who's that?" Ethan asked, eyeing Daniel curiously. "An old friend," Maria said softly, brushing hair from her son's forehead. Daniel learned that night what 15 years apart had done to Maria's life. After her father's health declined, she had gone into nursing exactly as he'd hoped, working in a children's hospital for nearly a decade before Ethan was born with a rare heart condition that required multiple surgeries. Surgeries her insurance only partially covered. Her husband, Ethan's father, had left when the medical bills became too overwhelming for him to face, leaving Maria to raise their son and cover the remaining costs alone. She had taken the housekeeping job at the Hale estate because it paid more than her nursing shifts and allowed her flexible hours to be home for Ethan's treatments. "You've been carrying all of this by yourself," Daniel said quietly, watching her check Ethan's oxygen levels with practiced, steady hands. "I've carried worse," Maria said simply. "You do what you have to do for your kids." Daniel sat with them for hours that night, listening more than talking, relearning a woman he realized he had never really stopped loving. Not in the desperate, dramatic way movies like to show, but in the quiet, aching way you miss someone whose absence reshaped the entire course of your life. Over the following weeks, he became a steady presence, not as a rescuer, which Maria made clear she did not need or want, but as someone determined to make amends in the ways that actually mattered. He used his medical connections to get Ethan evaluated by one of the top pediatric cardiologists in the country. He didn't pay Maria's bills outright, respecting her fierce independence, but he did something she couldn't refuse. He offered her a position overseeing patient care coordination at Hale Enterprises' new community health initiative, a role that used her nursing background, paid fairly, and came with full medical benefits for her and Ethan. For the first time in years, Maria let herself breathe. But not everyone was happy about the sudden closeness between Daniel Hale and his former housekeeper. The Hale Enterprises board of directors did not react well. 2 weeks after the broken engagement made headlines, Daniel sat across a long mahogany table from 8 of the company's senior executives, most of whom had known him since he was a scrappy 20-something with more ambition than resources. Now they looked at him with the kind of caution reserved for a man they feared was making a very public, very expensive mistake. "The Colworth merger is dead," said Richard Hendricks, the company's longtime CFO, tapping a pen against a folder of financial projections. "That deal was worth $400 million, Daniel. And now half the city thinks our CEO is having a very public breakdown over a housekeeper." "Her name is Maria," Daniel said evenly. "And she's not a housekeeper. She works in our community health division now." "That's not the point and you know it," Hendricks pressed. "Perception matters. Investors are asking questions. The Cole family is furious, and rightfully so, given the circumstances of the breakup." "The circumstances of the breakup," Daniel repeated, his voice hardening slightly, "were that my fiancée was cheating with her own cousin while planning to marry me for a merger deal. I don't particularly care what perception problem that creates for people more concerned with press coverage than basic decency." The room went quiet. It was Rosalind, sitting at the far end of the table as a board member herself, who finally spoke. "The company will survive one lost merger, Richard. It will not survive its own leadership abandoning the values Elaine built this family on in the first place." She looked pointedly around the table. "I watched my sister work double shifts so her son could have a future. I watched Maria Torres save that same sister's life without asking for a single thing in return. If this board can't understand why that matters more than a business deal, then perhaps this board has lost sight of what we're actually building here." Daniel felt something steady settle in his chest, gratitude for an aunt who had never stopped fighting for what mattered. The meeting ended without full resolution, tension still simmering beneath the surface, but Daniel walked out of that boardroom more certain than he'd been in years about the direction of his life. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa was fighting a very different battle. The video of her humiliating Maria had made her something of a public villain. Magazine articles dissected her cruelty, morning talk shows debated privilege and class, and the Colworth merger she'd hoped to secure through marriage collapsed entirely once Daniel's legal team quietly informed the Cole family about the affair footage. Preston Cole, facing his own fallout, distanced himself from Vanessa almost immediately, unwilling to let her scandal drag down his own reputation. Vanessa, cornered on nearly every side, decided if she couldn't win back her image through grace, she would win it back through control. She began reaching out to old family friends still connected to Hale Enterprises' board, spinning a narrative that painted herself as the true victim. A woman scorned by a billionaire who'd abandoned her for an employee, framing Daniel's compassion as erratic, even unstable, behavior unfit for a company's public face. Slowly, quietly, She began planting seeds of doubt among the very people Daniel needed most. Maria, unaware of the storm building around her, was focused on something far more important. Ethan's upcoming surgery, scheduled for the following month, a procedure that could finally give her son the stable, healthy life she had spent 8 years fighting for. She had no idea that Vanessa was preparing one final, calculated move, one designed not just to hurt Daniel, but to make sure Maria never felt safe in his world again. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before Ethan's surgery. Maria was in her office at the community health center, reviewing patient files, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, exhausted from another sleepless night beside Ethan's bed, but something made her answer. "Is this Maria Torres?" A clipped, professional voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is regarding your son's insurance authorization for the upcoming cardiac procedure. I'm calling to inform you that the coverage previously approved has been flagged for review, and the procedure will need to be postponed pending further investigation." Maria's stomach dropped. What? That can't be right. Everything was already approved last month. "I understand this is difficult, but there's been a discrepancy identified in the employment records used for the coverage application. Until that's resolved, we're unable to proceed." Maria hung up, hands trembling, and immediately called the Human Resources Department at Hale Enterprises, only to be met with confused silence. Nobody there had flagged anything. It took 2 more frantic phone calls and a favor from a sympathetic case manager for Maria to learn the truth. Someone had anonymously submitted a formal complaint questioning the legitimacy of Maria's employment position, suggesting it had been created improperly, as a personal favor rather than a genuine business role, a complaint serious enough to trigger an automatic hold on all benefits tied to her file, including Ethan's surgical authorization. There was only one person who had access to both the company's internal systems and a motive strong enough to do something this cruel. Maria didn't call Daniel out of anger. She called him because she was terrified, because for the first time in months, the ground beneath her family's fragile stability had been ripped away without warning, and she didn't know where else to turn. Daniel arrived at the health center 20 minutes later, jaw set, eyes hard in a way Maria had never seen on him before. "This ends today," he said, already dialing his legal team. "I promise you, Maria, Ethan's surgery is happening exactly when it's supposed to happen. Nothing and no one is taking that away from him." It took less than 6 hours for Daniel's legal and HR teams to trace the anonymous complaint back to an IP address connected to a laptop registered under Vanessa Cole's name. The evidence was clear, damning, and criminally reckless. Tampering with a company employee's confidential medical benefits records was not just a personal betrayal, it was a serious legal violation. Daniel didn't hesitate. Within the week, formal legal action was filed, and the story, inevitably, reached the press again, this time painting an unmistakably different picture of who the real victim in this saga had always been. Vanessa, facing mounting legal and public pressure, finally reached out to Daniel directly, her voice shaking on the phone in a way he'd never once heard from her during their entire relationship. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "I just wanted you to see what it feels like to lose something you can't get back." "You didn't just try to hurt me, Vanessa," Daniel said quietly. "You tried to take away a sick child's surgery to make a point. There's no version of that where you're the victim in this story." The call ended in silence. Vanessa did not contest the legal proceedings further, quietly settling to avoid a public trial, disappearing from the city's social circles almost entirely within the following months. Ethan's surgery, delayed by less than 2 weeks in the end, was rescheduled and fully approved. Maria sat in the hospital waiting room on the morning of the procedure, gripping Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white, both of them silently praying for a boy who had already fought harder in his 8 years of life than most people fight in 80. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Maria had sat through countless hospital waiting rooms in her career as a nurse, had comforted dozens of frightened parents through exactly this kind of agonizing wait, but nothing had prepared her for what it felt like to be on the other side of that door, praying for her own child. Daniel never left her side. He cancelled every meeting, ignored every call from the board, and sat in that sterile waiting room holding Maria's hand through hour after hour of silence, offering the only thing he had left to give, his presence, steady and unwavering. "He's strong," Daniel said quietly, somewhere around hour 4, when Maria's composure finally began to crack. "He gets that from you." "I keep thinking about all the years I couldn't afford the tests that would have caught this earlier," Maria whispered, tears finally slipping free. "All the nights I told myself I was doing enough, when maybe I wasn't." "You were doing everything," Daniel said firmly, turning to face her fully. "You raised a brilliant, brave little boy completely on your own, while working 2 jobs, while carrying grief most people never have to face. Don't you dare sit here and tell yourself you weren't enough." When the surgeon finally emerged, mask lowered, exhaustion evident but a small, genuine smile on his face, Maria nearly collapsed with relief. "The repair was successful," the surgeon said. "Better than we even hoped. He's going to need recovery time and monitoring, but Maria, I think this kid is going to be just fine." Maria broke down completely then, years of held-back fear finally releasing all at once, and Daniel wrapped his arms around her without a second of hesitation, holding her together the way she had once held his mother together on a kitchen floor 15 years earlier. In the weeks that followed, as Ethan slowly recovered, first in the hospital, then at home, growing stronger and more energetic by the day, something quietly, steadily shifted between Daniel and Maria. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was small moments, Daniel learning how to make Ethan's favorite soup exactly the way Maria did. Maria laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember, at some old joke Daniel remembered from their teenage years. Ethan, still weak but full of curious energy, asking Daniel endless questions about how businesses worked, clearly fascinated by the man who had become a near-permanent fixture in their lives. One evening, sitting on Maria's small apartment balcony while Ethan slept soundly inside, fully recovered for the first time in his young life, Daniel finally said what he'd been holding back for months. "I know I don't get those 15 years back," he said quietly. "I know I can't undo what happened, or the way things fell apart, or the fact that you had to carry so much of your life without anyone standing beside you. But I don't want to spend the next 15 years the same way. I want to be here, not because I owe you, not out of guilt, but because loving you was the one thing in my life I never actually stopped doing, even when I convinced myself I had." Maria looked at him for a long, quiet moment, the city lights glowing softly behind him, before finally allowing herself to say the thing she had buried for 15 years under grief, survival, and fear. "I never stopped either," she whispered. "I just stopped letting myself hope." Word of Daniel's relationship with Maria eventually settled into the public consciousness not as scandal, but as something rarer, a story people genuinely rooted for. The same public that had once watched Vanessa's cruelty unfold in a viral video now watched, months later, as local news outlets covered the opening of the Hale Community Health Initiative's new pediatric wing, funded largely by Daniel and led clinically by Maria herself, who had been promoted to Director of Patient Services. The board, initially skeptical, had come around entirely once quarterly reports showed something they hadn't expected. Under Maria's leadership, the health initiative wasn't just doing good in the community, it was thriving financially, drawing partnerships and grants that strengthened Hale Enterprises' reputation far more than any merger with the Cole family ever could have. Richard Hendricks, the same CFO who had once pushed back hardest against Daniel's choices, found himself standing at the pediatric wing's ribbon-cutting ceremony, watching Maria speak passionately about accessible healthcare for working families, and turned to Rosalind with something close to admiration. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "About all of it. Elaine always said the measure of a person isn't how they treat people who can help them," Rosalind replied, smiling. "It's how they treat people who can't." Daniel finally understood that the night everything fell apart. "I think, in a strange way, we all needed to see it happen the way it did." Ethan, now fully recovered, had become something of a local celebrity himself, occasionally featured in hospital newsletters as a symbol of the initiative's success. A bright, energetic 8-year-old who had started telling anyone who would listen that he wanted to be a doctor who helps kids for free, like my mom does. Daniel watched him during the ceremony. This small boy who had somehow become an integral part of a life Daniel once thought would only ever revolve around boardrooms and quarterly earnings, and felt something settle deeply into place, a sense of purpose that no business deal had ever given him. Later that evening, after the cameras had gone and the crowds had dispersed, Daniel found Maria alone in the new pediatric wing, quietly checking on the final preparations before opening day. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder as she looked out over the small, colorful hospital beds soon to be filled with children who needed exactly what she had spent her whole life giving: steady, unwavering care. "I have something to ask you," he said softly. Maria turned in his arms, studying his face. "Daniel." "Not tonight," he said, smiling faintly. "I just wanted you to know it's coming. When it happens, I don't want it to be about big parties or a room full of people who don't actually know either of us. I want it to be quiet. Real. Just us, the way things should have always been." Maria smiled, resting her forehead against his. "I think I'd like that even more than I would have liked the party." 6 months later, on a quiet stretch of beach far from cameras, boardrooms, and champagne towers, Daniel Hale married Maria Torres in a ceremony of fewer than 30 guests. Rosalind, a handful of close friends, Maria's remaining family, and Ethan, standing proudly beside his mother as she walked barefoot across the sand. There were no diamond-studded shoes this time. No gold armchairs. No staff kneeling on marble floors for anyone's entertainment. Just two people who had lost each other once, found their way back through 15 years of silence, heartbreak, and quiet resilience, and finally chosen each other. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of a love that had somehow survived everything life had thrown at it. Daniel stood at the end of that small aisle, watching the woman who had once saved his mother's life, who had raised a sick child completely alone without ever once losing her compassion for others, walk toward him in a simple white dress, and thought about how strange life could be. 15 years ago, he had nothing but dreams and debt. Tonight, he had built an empire, but none of it, none of the money or success or headlines, meant anything close to what it meant to finally, truly come home to the person who had believed in him before he believed in himself. Ethan, now the happiest, healthiest version of himself, stood as Daniel's best man, grinning from ear to ear as he handed over the rings, already calling Daniel Dad in the easy, unhesitating way only children can offer real, unguarded love. If you've made it this far, I want you to remember something from Maria's story, because it's a lesson that matters far beyond this video. The way you treat people who can offer you nothing in return says everything about who you really are. Vanessa saw a woman on her knees and decided that made her small. Daniel saw the same woman and remembered exactly how much strength it takes to keep giving to others even when life has given you every reason to stop. Kindness is never wasted, even when it feels invisible. Even when nobody's watching. Especially then. Maria never set out to be recognized, rewarded, or rescued. She simply kept showing up for her son, for strangers, for a world that hadn't always been kind to her. And in the end, that quiet, steady goodness became the very thing that changed her life completely. So if this story moved you even a little, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back to you, even when you least expect it. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.